In our last video, we learned how to use the case, if, and choose functions whose purpose was to return a value determined by a condition you specify. Now, I know I mentioned that we are going to begin learning how to do database design and implementation, but before we get to that, there are still a few things that we need to make sure we go over. So in this video, we're going to learn how to use the COALESCE and ISNULL functions. These are two functions that you can use to work with null values. And both of these functions let you substitute non-null values with null values. Hey everyone, and welcome back to the SQL Server Series. This video is brought to you in reference to Joe Marach's SQL Server 2016 for developers. If you're interested in purchasing a copy of this book, then please follow the link in the description below. The COALESCE function is more flexible than the ISNULL function because it lets you specify a list of values. Then it returns the first non-null value in the list. When using the COALESCE function, all of the expressions in the list must have the same data type. If all the expressions are null, then this function returns a null value. Now the ISNULL function uses only two expressions. It returns the first expression if that expression isn't null. Otherwise, it returns the second expression. When using the ISNULL function, all of the expressions in the list must also have the same data type. Now let's step into a few examples and see how this stuff really looks. So the first thing I want to do is I'm going to reiterate our syntax for the COALESCE function and the ISNULL function. So I'm going to say COALESCE, and then COALESCE is set up to accept multiple expressions. So it'll be expression 1, and then you can have your second expression, and so on and so on. And then the ISNULL function can only take one expression, so it's going to be your check expression, checking to see if this expression is null. Then I want you to replace it with a value, and it's going to be our replacement value. So the differences between these two: the COALESCE function can take more than one expression to check if it's null and then have a replacement. The ISNULL function can only take one. So I'm going to step into my invoices table. I'm going to select all from invoices. And looks like right now invoices is not being recognized. So I need to make sure I'm using my AP database. Looks like we're using it now. And then in this table, I want to get my payment date. And then I want to say COALESCE. If my payment date is null, then I want you to pass in 1900-0101, and then we're going to name that as the new date. So I'm going to run this query, and if we look at our result set here, we have our payment date and our new date. And if we run into one where it was null, it will show us 1900-01-01, as we see here on row 89. This one was null, and our replacement value displays here. Now let's take a look at the ISNULL function. The next one I want to do is I want to select the same thing. I'll just do the same thing. I'll select my payment date, and then I'm just going to say ISNULL payment date. Then my return value, let's pass in no payment date. Let's say that, no payment date. And then we're going to name that as the new date. And of course, that's going to come from our invoices table. That's the table we're in. And I'm going to run this query. And conversion failed when converting character string to a small date time data type. Now remember, it has to be the same data type that we are replacing using the ISNULL and the COALESCE function. So instead, why don't we change this instead of no payment date? And I'm going to show you a way to work around that here in a second also. But we'll put 1900-0101 for now. Then we'll run that, and we see our payment date here and our new date here. And if we run into a null value, it'll be 1900-0101. 01-01. Now, let's see, how do we handle a situation where we need to substitute for a different data type so we don't run into that error message that we just had? Well, let's open up a new query. This time I want to go into my vendors table. And the columns I want my vendor name. And then I'm going to say COALESCE. And then we're going to use the cast function. You should have learned about that already in a previous video. We're going to cast our invoice total as a variable character. And then we're going to say no invoices. So if our invoice total is null, we're going to display no invoices. And since no invoices is a variable character data type, we have casted our invoice total over to a variable character data type using inside of our COALESCE function. So we're nesting two functions together. And then we're going to display, what do I have here? And then we're going to name this as our invoice total. It's going to come from vendors. And then let's get a little interesting here. Let's do a left join on our invoices table. And then that's going to be on our vendors.vendor ID. We're going to set that equal to our invoices.vendor ID. And then we're just going to order this by our vendor name. And then we're going to run this. Now we have our vendor name here in our first column. And then we have our COALESCE, which is saying, hey, if our invoice total is null, after we've casted it over to a variable character, show us no invoices. So look at our invoice total column here. This one was null, so it's saying no invoices. This one was not null, so as a variable character cast, it's going to show the invoice total here. And we did a join on our vendors table to our invoices table, so that way we could have our vendor name here and our invoice total here in a single result set. So that's how you get around that error message of running into a situation where it's of a different data type and you can't perform the substitute. Well, you just cast it over to the data type that you want and it solves that issue for you. So in many cases, it'll be really simple for you to just use the ISNULL function in programming. But, of course, when you run into situations where you need to cast over a data type, or you want to include multiple expressions, if you want to include a second expression in the COALESCE function, you can do that. And that's what's useful for the COALESCE function. So that is all for this video. In the next video, we're going to learn how to use the grouping function. Now, I know I did say we are going to get into database design and implementation, and I promise we will, but I just want to make sure that we've got some of these things covered before we enter into database design and implementation. So we're so close, we're so there, we're almost there, but these next couple of videos will close it out for us and we'll be into that subject shortly. So thank you for watching. If you're interested in the next video, then head on over to database-tutorials.com. If you like this video, hit the like button. If you didn't like it, then the rules. Thumbs down. So thank you for watching and see you next time.